alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
It's time to bring this back to life. I started this series 2 years ago, attempting to define the regressive left. I've made 5 episodes in which I talked about the characteristics of this social plague, exposed its fallacies, and provided some historical and philosophical background. I then decided that I should go deeper and perform a critical analysis of the academic trends that it relies on. For that, I realized that I needed to read more, and that is why I haven't uploaded a new video in this series for over a year. I still have a lot to read before I get down to it. But recently, I attended MythCon, and something happened there that made me realize another video is needed. What happened was a debate between Dr. Richard Carrier, one of the people behind Atheism Plus, the idea that brought SJW politics into the atheist movement, and Sargon of Akkad, one of the leaders of the opposition to it. The debate was around the question of where do social justice and atheism meet, but it was a rather frustrating affair, which revolved almost entirely around semantics. I realized then and there that before we can move further in the debate, we need to clarify what we mean when we talk about social justice. For Dr. Carrier, it seems, social justice just means any cause that you believe in. His main argument was that atheists should not be content with speaking against religion, but should also pick a cause to fight for. The example he gave was fighting for women's right to abortion. But in that, deliberately or not, he deflected from the discussion we wanted to have, which is how social justice warriors are destroying liberalism. Social justice, nowadays, is a term that became associated with a specific movement, and what Carrier was doing just served to blur the term. This is the argument that Sargon of Akkad was making, but when he tried to define what this movement is, he found that it was like trying to catch a greased pig with your bare hands. At first he called it Marxism, then Intersectionality, then Postmodernism. That led to a discussion about the meaning of these terms, and eventually, very little was achieved. To prevent this from happening again, it's time we figured out what we are talking about. So, what is social justice? Is it Marxism? Is it intersectionalism? Is it postmodernism? The answer is, it is all of these things and none of these things. The social justice warriors are grave robbers, who dig up the corpses of dead white men, steal from them what they want, and then put it all together. The result is a philosophical abomination, a Frankenstein's monster that has no intellectual right to exist. But that is why it is also hard to kill, because it doesn't have a brain, and you don't know exactly where its heart is. So, allow me to take a shot at explaining how this monster works. Some of you might be tired of hearing about social justice. This is a good sign. It means that you don't feel stifled by it like you used to. In the time that has passed since I started this series, our power has grown, and we are now a cultural force that rivals the SJWs. We saw evidence of that at MythCon, where Richard Carrier was on the defense against Sargon. Personally, I feel increasingly sorry for SJWs, who are quite obviously the biggest victims of their own ideology, which is making their existence a very miserable one. It is more interesting for me now to develop the counterculture that we've created. But the time to lay down our weapons has not come yet. The way I see it, until now we have been defending Middle-earth, and now we are ready to march on Mordor. Mordor is the Academy, and we need to take the fight to them. For that, we need to think critically about the schools of thought that comprise the social justice movement. For that purpose, this series will go on. A detailed critical analysis shall be provided in upcoming parts of this series. In this video, I'll just outline what these schools of thoughts are. As I was thinking about this metaphor, I started thinking, if Mordor is the Academy, and the different regressive elements that I've described so far are the rings that it created to rule our thoughts, what is the ring to rule them all? What is the main idea at the basis of it all? And I think that the main idea can be found in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's famous saying, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Now that sounds like a paradoxical saying, but what Rousseau means is that the nature of man is to be free, and yet the society of today oppresses him. The reason for oppression, then, is not the flawed nature of humans, but the flawed nature of contemporary society. If we fix the way society is structured, humans will live in a utopian state. That is the big difference between the 18th century Rousseau and 17th century Enlightenment thinkers like, say, Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes also claimed that man's natural state is to be free, but to him it meant that he is free to pursue all of his urges and desires. Because of that, the natural state is a state where it's every man for himself, and humans harm each other. Therefore, they have to form a society with rules, to protect themselves from one another. So for Hobbes, the limit that society puts on our actions is not oppression, but limits that we willfully accept as necessary for our survival. For Rousseau, on the other hand, the natural state is a state where people live in equality and harmony. So the reason that they are not doing so today is because their second nature has been corrupted. It has been corrupted by the social institutes, by the education system and by the culture. So if we fix those things, we will develop a second nature that is compatible with our benign first nature, and then we will have utopia, where full freedom and equality shall prevail. We've already discussed some of this in part 5, and there we've also seen what happened when the French Revolution tried to implement a crude version of Rousseau's philosophy. We further described how the failure of the French Revolution prompted Enlightenment thinkers to re-evaluate their ideas, and develop the notion that man still has to mature before he can create the perfect society. In other words, that man's nature is indeed good, like Rousseau said, but man hasn't reached his final form yet. Because of that, because he is in this incomplete, immature state, he is still incapable of fully manifesting his good nature. The purpose of enlightenment, then, is to guide man towards maturation. Only then will he be able to form the utopia. We also saw how this led to the rise of Hegel, who claimed that the progress towards man's maturation is done in a dialectic way. There is always an ideology that is in power, and this ideology makes one group of people dominate and oppress other groups of people. But neither the masters nor the slaves can be fully happy in this situation, because this is not the true nature of man. Eventually, someone of the oppressed class reworks the ruling ideology to create a better ideology, and this new ideology spreads to other minds until it leads to a revolution that establishes a new and better social order. This order still has masters and slaves, but is less oppressive than before. And then someone creates a better ideology, and so forth. According to Hegel, this process has already reached its end. With the Enlightenment, the human mind has devised the perfect order, where everyone is free and equal. All that is left now is for this ideology to spread to every mind, and then we will have a global utopia. But after Hegel came Marx, who adopted his dialectic theory of progress, but claimed that he got a few things wrong. First, Hegel argued that the progress takes place in the realm of the spirit, where the human mind develops better and better ideas that supersede one another. Marx, on the other hand, argued that it happens in the realm of matter. Progress happens when the prevailing economic system is replaced by a better economic system. An economic system produces a certain amount of wealth, but since this wealth isn't enough to feed everyone, the people are divided into master and slave classes. Gradually, better ideas and better instruments are produced, and the overall wealth increases. Eventually, the overall wealth reaches a point where a new economic system can be envisioned, and the oppressed class adopts this new ideology and carries out a revolution that puts it in place. This new system is more equal and wealthy than before, but still has master and slave classes. But within it, better ideas and instruments can be devised, and the overall wealth increases until it reaches a point where an entirely new system can be envisioned, and so forth. Hegel believed that enlightenment was the end of the road, the final destination of progress, and that its ideas will erase class and create a homogeneous and harmonious society. Marx saw this as another mistake. The economic system created by enlightenment was capitalism, and it is indeed more equal and harmonious than previous systems, but still divides society into two classes: the bourgeoisie, who are the employers, and the proletariat, who work for them. The capitalist system is an exploitative system, in which the workers get only a small share of the wealth that they are producing, and the bourgeoisie get richer and richer on their backs. Based on this dialectic theory of human history, Marx predicted the future. Capitalism, he said, will continue to create greater and greater wealth, and for the first time in the history of human civilization, there will be enough wealth to feed every human on Earth, and the utopian society will become possible. At the same time, it will destroy every existing culture, until only two group identities shall remain: the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. As a result, the global proletariat will feel solidarity, and there will be a universal identity on which it can form a universal homogeneous society. Meanwhile, the wealth disparity between the classes will gradually increase, until eventually the proletariat will revolt, abolish capitalism, and establish a global communist society, where everyone shares the wealth. There were a couple of disastrous ideas contained in this philosophy put forth by Marx. First, by transferring the process from the realm of ideas into the realm of matter, he could treat history as if it is an exact science. Economy and wealth can be calculated, and based on his mathematical calculations, Marx and his disciples believed that they can predict the future. Second, by predicting that we need just one more revolution before utopia will prevail, Marx unwittingly gave his followers license to take any means necessary to bring about this revolution. Since they are fighting to transform a world in which millions die every year from wars, malnutrition and exploitation into a utopian world where no one will die of those things, whatever they do to get there is justified. Marx himself warned against trying to impose communism on the people. He said that the historical process must be allowed to run its course, and the communist ideology must take hold of the minds of the people before the revolution can occur. Alas, since the Marxists believed that they could predict the future, they didn't think that they needed to wait. In part 5 we described what happened when the communists in Russia took hold, and how they felt that they had the right to impose their ideals on the people, believing that this will fix their corrupted second nature, so that their benevolent true nature can manifest itself. The Marxists in the West, meanwhile, were dealing with a different problem. The problem was this: capitalism in the West has reached a point where it produces enough wealth to provide for everyone's needs. According to the Marxist theory, this should have been followed by the rise of the new system, the communist system, and the proletariat was supposed to revolt and make sure that it takes place. And yet, this did not happen, and working class people seem happy and content to live in the capitalist society. 20th century Marxist thinkers had to explain why Marx got it wrong, and the answer was this: the proletariat doesn't revolt because capitalism is an extremely pervasive ideology, which is infiltrating the minds of the people and creating a false consciousness that makes them believe that they are free and happy. Thus, the change cannot just happen naturally, as Marx thought, but we must actively work to break the conditioning. Western Marxists, realizing that politics will not get them to their goal, thus turned to education as a way to change man's second nature. They started to market their ideas through the academy and raise generations of students on them. The problem is, young students are usually more impetuous than old professors. By the late 60s, Marxist activism was based on some very rudimentary beliefs. 1. That the Western people are now ready to create a utopian society. 2. That the capitalist system is actively preventing them from doing so. We must therefore bring down the system by force, and utopia will prevail. In the 70s, this way of thinking resulted in a lot of terrorism and bloodshed. And that's one of the reasons why it completely lost favor with the general public, and kind of disappeared by the end of that decade. But this simplistic structure was then picked up by another way of thinking, which in part 4 I've defined as feminist creationism. Feminist creationism is the belief that the gender roles in today's society are not the result of natural evolution, but rather of a moment of creation, sometime in the past, which resulted in the formation of a patriarchy. The patriarchy is an ideological structure that runs our society, in the same way that Marxists see capitalism, and it divides us into a dominating class of men and a dominated class of women, similar to the bourgeoisie and the proletariat in the Marxist theory. However, while Marxism describes the capitalist system as something that we have arrived at after a long dialectic process of progress, feminist creationism, for reasons that we shall later discuss, does away with this idea of progress. The patriarchy has been around for millennia, and remained essentially the same. It's as if they've taken only the last stage in Marxist history, and used it to characterize all of history. When you accuse regressive feminists that they hate men, they will deny it, and point out that they don't claim that men are knowingly oppressing women. The patriarchy, they say, is constructing the minds of both women and men, and we are all victims of it. Men also suffer, even though they are brought up to dominate women, because a master's existence is actually miserable. Again, this is borrowed from Marxism. The Marxists claim that the bourgeoisie are also victims of capitalism, and are miserable even with all their wealth, because it is against human nature to exploit other people. But this feminist defense is disingenuous. It is true that they see men too as victims of the patriarchy, but what men are guilty of, in the eyes of feminists, is that they refuse to bring down the patriarchy. The feminists believe that they want what's best for men, because bringing down the patriarchy will make men happy as well. But most men disagree with this theory, and that is why feminists hate them. Once again, this is identical to how Marxists regard the bourgeoisie. In a communist society, they believe, the former bourgeoisie will also be happier than they are today. And yet the bourgeoisie won't let the Marxists do them this favor, so the Marxists hate them. But why should men adopt a feminist position? Well, remember what Hegel and Marx said. The oppressed class is the one that holds the more progressed ideology. And since feminists represent women, the oppressed class, their ideology should take over. There's just one little problem here though. Once you have done away with the dialectic process, this idea isn't valid anymore. Hegel and Marx could justify this idea, both because it makes sense within the dialectic theory, and also because they could point to cases in history in which this actually happened, in which the oppressed class held the more progressive ideology, the ideology that eventually took over. But feminist creationism doesn't believe in progress. All historical changes, according to it, happened on the surface, and presented no real essential change. So how can they rationally justify the idea that women, the so-called oppressed class, are the ones that hold the more progressed position? They can't. This idea isn't deduced from the feminist creationist theory. It is just a leftover from Marxism. Now we are beginning to see why I say that social justice warriors are grave robbers. They have dug up the corpses of Hegel, Marx and other dialectic thinkers, took from them only what they like, and discarded the rest. The result is an ideology that has no inner rationality to hold it together, a bundle of self-contradictions. The SJWs usually don't realize that these ideas are derived from Marxism, and scoff at the accusation that they are Marxists. Actual Marxists are also incensed when they hear this suggestion, and announce that they have nothing to do with these SJW idiots. And they are right. Feminist creationism is a total bastardization of dialectic thought, and should not be confused with Marxism. But Marxism is what led to it, and Marxists should acknowledge it and own it. So, feminist creationism is made of bits and pieces of Marxism, creating an abomination that philosophically has no right to exist. However, these bits and pieces are only part of what makes up the Frankenstein's monster that is a social justice ideology. Let us now continue our autopsy of it, and work our scalpel into another part of its pathological anatomy: intersectionality. The idea behind intersectionality is that we should not deal with every form of oppression as an independent thing, but realize that they intersect, and create specific problems where they do. So a black woman doesn't just suffer oppression from being black and from being a woman. There are also specific problems that belong to being a black woman, which traditional theories have missed. Now, this in itself makes sense. It makes sense that the intersection of different group identities does indeed cause specific problems for the individual, and acknowledging it can help us address and solve these problems. But when intersectionality gets combined with feminist creationism, the results are catastrophic. First, the introduction of intersectionality is one of the reasons why feminism had to disavow dialectic theory and adopt creationism instead. As long as it was just about men and women, you could say that the patriarchy is just the latest stage in the dialectic process. But if you adopt dialectic thought, you have to admit that there is progress, and that Western culture is the most progressed culture. With intersectionality, which believes that we must fight white domination over non-whites, you cannot possibly accept the idea that white culture is more progressed. And so, the feminists must deny that there has been any progress, and instead believe that our society is the result of a single act of creation. This is how intersectionality has a bad effect on feminism. But the effect that creationist feminism has on intersectionality is even worse. Because creationist feminism asserts that our minds are all shaped by the patriarchy, and that this will remain the case until the patriarchy is brought down. And so, your individual struggle doesn't really matter. It is pointless as long as the patriarchy exists. When you apply this model to intersectionality, the result is that SJWs pay no attention to the problems of the individual. for instance of the black woman. What is being intersectionalized in social justice thought is not the individual, but the system. The system is no longer just the patriarchy. It is the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. And all of our energies must be directed towards bringing it down. And so, when an Arab woman complains about the treatment of women in the Arab society, the SJWs tell her, "Shut up, you are helping the imperialist patriarchy." If a Western woman complains about being harassed by male members of a non-white minority, she is told, "Shut up, you are helping the white supremacist patriarchy." If a poor working-class man complains about being mistreated by a wealthy woman, he is told, "Shut up, you are just displaying the misogyny of the patriarchy." And so forth. And so, nothing actually gets done for the individual. They are all told that they should forget about trying to fix their specific problem, and instead concentrate all their efforts on bringing down the patriarchy, because this will immediately cure all of their problems. Intersectional feminism, that purports itself as a movement that focuses on the specific problems of every individual identity, is actually busy shutting all these individuals up. What intersectional feminism ultimately amounts to is a power play by black feminists to take over the movement. It has allowed them to portray themselves as more oppressed than the white feminists, and in their logic, as we recall, that means that their views are more progressed. The white feminists are told, "Bow before us, bitches." As whites, you are actually part of the imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So shut up and listen to us, because we are the ones who hold the truth. The term imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy was coined by the black feminist Bell Hooks sometime back in the 90s. Since then, LGBT identities have also become part of SJW intersectional talk, so I guess we should also add heteronormative and cisnormative as adjectives of the patriarchy. But here, there are some feminists who are fighting back against allowing trans women into the movement, and I suspect that part of it comes from the realization that once this is allowed, the trans women will be the ones in control, the ones who can tell all other feminists, "Bow before us, bitches, you are all part of the cisnormative patriarchy. We are the most oppressed, and therefore the ones who hold the truth." The trans issue really throws intersectional feminists into a loop. The current debate going on in their circles on whether trans women are women or men might seem pointless to an outsider, but a lot is hanging in the balance. The question is, are trans women the most oppressed group, or are they actually part of the oppressive patriarchy? These are the ways in which feminist creationism and intersectionality, when combined together, are creating something that is even worse than both of them. The social justice ideology is basically an intersection of philosophical abominations. But we are not done. To complete the portrayal of our intersectional Frankenstein's monster, we need to talk about another school of thought, postmodernism. Postmodernism is philosophy that argues that the modern age has ended. What is the modern age, according to the postmodernists? Well, it is the age that begins at the moment we've discussed earlier, when, at the end of the 18th century, Western culture started to be ruled by the idea that man needs to progress and mature, until he reaches a point where he can create a perfect society. According to the postmodernists, the belief that we can get to that point has lost its ground. We should therefore adjust our thinking and our values to this new reality. Postmodernism is one of the reasons that Marxism lost favor. Marxism is a modern way of thinking, which still believes that man is progressing towards utopia, so it is hard for it to operate in a postmodern world. That's why some radical leftists had to reinvent themselves and develop the social justice ideology, which, as we've described, steals bits and pieces of Marxism. And it also steals bits and pieces of postmodernism to create an irrational and unholy mix. For instance, let's take the question of power. Marxism, as we've seen, believes that society is ruled by an ideological structure that gives one class of people domination over the other class. Being a modern way of thought, Marxism believes that we can overthrow this structure and create a society where there are no power relations, no discrimination and oppression. Michel Foucault, one of the originators of postmodernist thought, argued otherwise. He showed that there is no one power structure that is designed to give one group domination over another group. Instead, power is dispersed and held in many places, creating a grid which we are all part of. This grid does create a paradigm that is ruling our thought, but this paradigm isn't to the benefit of any group. Every one of us is discriminated in some ways. Every one of us takes part in the discrimination of others. And this cannot be changed. We can make things better and less oppressive, but we can never be completely rid of oppression or discrimination. The modern dream of creating a world with no oppression is therefore a pipe dream. Power relations are a fixture of human society. This realization is liberating in several ways. First, when you realize that there will always be power relations, you accept it as part of reality, and you don't feel oppressed anymore. Just like you don't feel oppressed by gravity, a force that is always holding you down. Humans have found ways to overcome it, like creating machines that fly, but you can never eliminate gravity. In the same way, we have found ways to make human society more free and less oppressive, and formed a society in which one can live a happy life. And we can carry on and make things even better. But we cannot eliminate oppression altogether. And if you continue to believe that there is actually a way to create a non-oppressive human society, you will always feel oppressed. So you have to free your mind of that old modernist notion. Second, it is liberating because you realize that there is no one group that oppresses another group. Men suffer discrimination just like women, and women take part in creating the discrimination just like men. So there's no place for hate towards entire groups. Third, it is liberating for the individual, because you realize that you have power to change your situation. Every one of us occupies an intersection on the grid, and holds some of the power. I can sit at home and make a YouTube video, and this video then spreads through the grid and creates a ripple effect that reaches other points of power. So, unlike the Marxists, I do not feel powerless. This way of thinking, of course, is deadly to radical feminism, as it completely undermines the patriarchy theory. But they found a way to appropriate Foucault for their needs. When you point out to them that you can no longer say that men have all positions of power, so we are no longer a patriarchal society, they will answer that power has been dispersed, and that the patriarchy is now a grid which has its power held in many places. In other words, rather than accepting that Foucault's philosophy invalidates the whole patriarchy theory, they presuppose the patriarchy, presuppose that there is a structure that oppresses women, and only then use Foucault to characterize this oppression. And thus we get another part of the social justice ideology. In previous chapters, I characterized the regressive left as radical left that is masquerading as liberal, and thus fools many liberals into taking sides with it. The main thing that defines the radical left is the idea that they know how to bring utopia, so they think that they have the right to force it on others. But since we no longer live in the modern paradigm, no longer think that we are progressing towards utopia, liberals are no longer swayed by utopian discourse. The radical left thus has to cloak its true intentions, and postmodernist language is what it usually uses as a cloaking device. Language, of course, is an important theme in postmodernist thought, as well as modern thought. One of the things that defined the modern age was the realization that language plays a big part in determining how we view the world. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Enlightenment philosophers argued that our minds can perceive reality as it is, and on that basis form a well-structured language that can represent it. Modern thinkers argue that it is not that simple, since the language that we grew up into already shapes how we perceive reality. No existing language represents the truth, they just represent the narrative of the people who speak it. Thus, the modern thinkers set out to overcome narratives and create a language that can represent reality as it is, as part of the process of man's maturation. But gradually the realization sank in that we are incapable of creating such a language, and the postmodernists claimed that this modern project was itself just a narrative. According to the postmodernists, we will forever be stuck in narratives, which will bias the way we perceive reality. But the fact that language cannot represent the absolute truth doesn't mean that it is a bad tool. You can remain loyal to intellectual honesty even if you can't reach absolute truth. There are still many other reasons to want to remain rational and empirical, and aspire to create a language that best represents reality as we know it. Therefore, many postmodern thinkers still maintain loyalty to reason and science. At the same time, we should be aware that our language has some bias, and that this bias can sometimes lead to social discrimination. So there is also merit in criticizing language from this angle, and aspiring to create a language that is less discriminatory. That is the liberal approach to handling the insights of postmodernism. Social justice ideology takes these insights and twists them. Combined with feminist creationism, it produces the claim that our language is biased because it was created by the patriarchy. Again, this goes back to the idea that man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. The SJWs believe that if only our language was structured correctly, there would be no discrimination. So the existing language is perceived as violence towards the so-called oppressed groups, and we must create narratives to counteract it. Since language can't represent objective truth anyway, we have license to create narratives that are completely based on subjective experience, and disregard facts. The only value that they have to obey is that they supposedly help to undermine oppression and achieve social justice. And so, social justice creates narratives of oppression, which are taken as gospel. These narratives, of course, feed into the discourse of intersectional feminism, and enhance the hate towards the imperialist, white supremacist, heteronormative, cis-normative capitalist patriarchy. And so we find ourselves where we are today. These, then, are the components of the social justice ideology. It's a combination of postmodernism, intersectionality, and feminist creationism, which itself is a bastardization of Marxism. Taken on their own, Marxism, intersectionality, and postmodernism, while having a lot of serious problems, also have merit. But when you just tear out parts of them, and then patch these parts together in the way that a social justice ideology is doing it, you get this irrational bundle of victimhood, resentment, grievance, vengefulness, intolerance, narrow-mindedness, and bigotry, which has no merit whatsoever. The problem with Frankenstein monsters such as these is that they are hard to kill, because they are hard to define. I hope I helped you understand the anatomy of this monster. In the upcoming parts, I will get deeper into the schools of thought discussed here, and show how they got twisted into this monstrosity. This will require some research, so bear with me. The social justice ideology presents itself as the next step of human progress. In fact, it is a regression, a barbaric transgression. The social justice warriors are anti-freedom, anti-equality, anti-diversity, anti-tolerance, anti-democracy, anti-science, and anti-reason. They are a threat to everything Western civilization has built over millennia. And that is why they are the regressive left.